feels really good to be here. On behalf of my family, my wife June, my kids Harrison, Jessica, and William, my mother Catherine, and my sister's family, I'd also like to thank all of you for your prayers, your cards, your emails, your gifts, and for being here today. It means a great deal to all of us, so thank you. There's also another group of people we want to thank that didn't make the trip, and that's the Familia, the Gumbadis back home. There's a big contingency in New Jersey and the Carolinas, down in Florida, and in Arizona too that could not make the trip, but we want to let them know by filming this event that they're very much a part of this celebration. So when you watch this, you're here with us. I thought I'd share a few words about the relationship I had with my father. It was pretty unique. I knew it all along, but after he passed and I had a chance to reflect on it, I was just even in more awe of what I really had. All of us had him for 82 years. Well, for 49 years, I was blessed to have him as my father. And when my brother Michael passed away in a drowning accident on a family vacation, my father became my brother. And a few years after that, when I got married, he became my best man at my wedding. And for the last 20 years, he has simply just been my best friend. And when I thought about this, I've heard people talk about it's the quality of time you spend with somebody, or in some cases it's the quantity of time. Well, I was lucky enough to have quality in the quantity. And I reflected about how that came to be. The obvious answer was in proximity. Obviously, I grew up in his household, but in Lake Forest, I lived 5 minutes from him. We both moved up to Gurnee and built houses that were 5 minutes apart. So proximity-wise, we were very close. But as I began to think about how deep this relationship was and how meaningful it became, I started to ask the question, well, how did this come about? And I can tell you what it was not from. It wasn't from phone calls. My father and I never talked for more than 38 seconds flat. A typical phone call would be, "Hey, Pops, how you doing?" "Good, Dave, what's cooking?" "Not too much." "How are the Indians?" The kids. "They're doing fine, yada, yada." "How's Mima?" "She's great. She's right here. You want to talk to her?" Click, 38 seconds on the dime. So it wasn't phone calls. And we didn't really have a relationship that was based on having coffee or breakfast, lunch, or dinner. We never did. That's not to say our families didn't share time together, because we had great family dinners that were great discussions. But for he and I, we didn't develop our rapport that way. So I thought a little more, and then the answer jumped out at me, and it was one word. And the one word will probably bring the hair on my wife's neck and my mother's neck right up, and that one word is projects. We did thousands of projects together, and he loved it. He enjoyed projects. And unfortunately, or I guess I should say fortunately in my case, he's 100% Italian, and he was born without the gene that allows a normal person to call a skilled tradesman. Never did he ever call an electrician, a plumber, a painter, a mechanic. It never happened. So I thought I'd just kind of curtail these 42 years, as I call it, of projects, of thousands of projects, into three eras. The first one I call light man. The second one is cheap labor, and the third is safety supervisor. So the first one, light man, happened between the ages of 7 and 15. And my father recruited me. I remember I was 7 years old, almost William's age, or a little older than William. And he asked me to help him with a project. And here's my dad, bigger than life, the guy with all the tools that could fix anything, asking me to participate in a project. So I'm thinking, yeah, let's do it. What's my job? And I was to be the light guy to go underneath the car, and he had one of those special mechanic roller deals with the headrest, and I thought that was cool too. So I was supposed to be under the car with the spotlight, and I was, and we did this project. I think it was an alternator. And at the time, I was 7 years old. My attention span was 7 seconds. So as I drifted away, so did the light, and my father was patient enough to bring me back. And when we did the project, and I didn't know it at the time, but he really didn't need me for that project. He had a drop light. He could have done it without me. But it was years later, after Light Man, I became Screwdriver Boy, and then Hammer Man, and he just taught me all the tools, and we went into the power tools, and so that happened, and over the course of until I was 15, and had a pretty good sense of all the tools and how to fix a lot of things. But I was in college, looking back, and I was in a psychology class listening to the professor, and the professor said, one of the best ways not to communicate with your child is to sit them down and talk to them in the eye. They tend to clam up. He went on to say that one of the better ways is to engage them into drawing, doing some sort of modeling, or engage them in a project. And it was right there that I was like, oh, that sly dog, he got me again. So after Light Man came Cheap Labor. That was after I was 15 to maybe 30 years old, where I really kind of knew that my father was pretty frugal as well as smart, and I had become cheap labor to him. But that was okay. I respected him, and somehow he made all these projects a lot of fun. And one of the things he did was to throw intense projects into the mundane. I mean, we would do things like fix, faucets and whatnot, but we'd also do things like re-roof an entire ranch house. We would put on additions. He would take load-bearing walls down, and they were always exciting, and it was a lot of fun to do with him. I remember one project. He said, "I have a project." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Nah, I've got a sketch." Ooh, that was always dangerous, the sketch. So I said, fine, went over, and I saw this sketch, and he was a sales guy, so he was, pretty good at napkin presentations, and this one was just a beauty, sucked me right in. I'm looking at this thing, and there's a big oak tree with a string around, or a rope around it. There's a house, our house, next to it. There's a 2-story ladder on it. There's a stick figure with a rope around its waist. Moi. A chainsaw, also with a rope. And it was just beautiful. I was like, okay, well, so what's the plan? He's like, well, you're going to go up here, and if the chainsaw falls, we got a rope there. I got your back. When the tree falls, if it falls towards the house, I pull the rope. I kid you not, this was just vintage Will. And so, I was a bit of a daredevil back then. I said, all in, great, just can we start something on fire? And we really got something great here. But what was interesting is my mother would always be hovering around during the planning stage of this operation, and she would say, Bill, I don't think that's a good idea. David could get hurt, or we could hurt the house. And he'd look at her like, Catherine, it costs $2,000 to have some guy come in and do this. So he would shoo her away, and then she just knew instinctively when to come, 3 hours later at the critical stage of that project where his drawing was not into scale. The oak tree was way bigger. There was no way I could reach it, but we were still trying to pull off this feat. And she'd again say, Bill, I don't think that's a good idea. And he would shoo her inside, but that would provide us just enough focus to really kind of save our rear ends and get the job done. So the last stage, safety supervisor, when he got a little bit older, he wasn't as physically fit to do some of these larger projects that I initiated, that I was the foreman, the project lead, so I thought. So he invented this role called safety supervisor that was above me. So, having great respect for my father, I thought this is perfect. He should be the lead man on the pole, and so that was his role. Safety supervisor, always had a chair, always had, the director's captain on, and would guide Harrison, my new recruit, into some of these projects that we had going on. But our projects were special. A good project always has like a good story has a beginning, middle, and end. Our projects always had a beginning, a middle, another beginning, and a middle, and an end, and usually went through several meals. So there was plenty of time to kapitz, to communicate, to bond, and that's really what we did. We always laughed. We always argued respectfully. If you do something right, there's generally one way to do it. But if you do things wrong, as we did, there's many ways to do things wrong. So there was always discussion on how we could do a project. There were always injuries. Nothing ever serious, but comic relief. It was just waiting for the ice to break that first injury, whether it was a thumb or a 2x to the head or whatever, and we would just start laughing at each other, and it was just a comic act. We experienced it. We didn't have to watch a show. We just experienced it and lived it. So the last two projects of his life were really important to me. One happened on May 16th. It was my birthday, and my mother, sister, and I had been taking care of him for 6 weeks, and it was a very traumatic 6 weeks, and he had lost 30 pounds, and we had been through the ringer. But on this day, it was my birthday, I decided to break him out of his continuing care unit. He had been in and out of the ER and the ICU, and he was in a wheelchair, so I broke him out that morning. It was a sunny day, and I put him in the car, bumped his head in the car, and he couldn't talk, but he gave me the sign, like, nice job, way to go. So it was right on cue. Brought him to my house, got him out of the chair, brought him around to the back of my house. We put in a really nice big patio, brick paver patio, and we had a lot of cigars and Bevos together out there. And in this case, it wasn't planned, but I had a big post and a light on it that was broken. And instead of just sitting there, I went and got my tools, screwdriver, needle nose pliers, whatnot. I rolled him up, put the tools on his lap, and I took the top off, and he held the screws. And it was the most touching moment where it was just all okay. He accepted it, I accepted it, and it was just where we were in that moment. And my wife was out back, and she was deadheading some flowers and different things, and she stopped and she said, "Hey," and I looked up, and she said, "Wipe that smile off your face." I was just so in awe that I was still with him, even in the capacity that he was in. It was really a touching moment. And then the last project we worked on together was that of his health, the last 6 weeks. As I mentioned, we just did everything we possibly could. It was the most committed, dedicated, compassionate I have ever been to any project. It was a 24/7 experience, doctors and specialists and trying, you name it. We brought kids to see him and dogs into the continuing care unit and broke him out to his house, my house, and it was pretty intense. But the project did not turn out like we had or I had planned. And as my father had taught me thousands of times before, that the end result, the goal, the desired outcome, the plan, was not necessarily the most important thing. It was all that happened in between the beginning and the end that really mattered. And we've all heard the saying that life is not a destination but a journey. Our journey ended up being thousands of cherished projects. Happy Father's Day, Pops.